They looked right past my badge, past my rank, past me. "Ma'am, your name is not on the list." That's what the security officer said loud and clear as I stood outside the gates of West Point. I showed him my military ID again slowly this time. Nova Sterling, Major General, Department of Defense. He didn't even flinch. No entry without family clearance. "Step aside, please." A few feet away, my parents saw the whole thing. My mother turned her back. My father tugged on his sleeve like I was some stranger from the street. And Jasper, my baby brother, dressed crisp in army blue, grinned at the crowd and said, "They must think she's logistics or clerical or something." I froze, humiliated, in front of 100 cadets, officers, and my own blood. No one spoke up for me. No one corrected him. I was erased again. Just like every holiday, every family photo, every time I made the front page for something that wasn't worth bringing up at dinner. I turned to leave. And then I heard tires screech. A black sedan pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped General Bennett himself. 4 stars on his chest and fury in his stride. He didn't nod, didn't whisper. He said it out loud. "Stand down. She's not a guest. She's the senior officer here. Welcome, Admiral Hayes." My brother's smirk vanished. And for the first time in my life, my whole family had to clap. Or look like cowards. My name is Nova Sterling, and after a lifetime of being left out, I finally showed up, where I wasn't welcome, and left a mark they couldn't erase. Before I share the full story, I'd love to know you're here with me. Just drop a quick hi in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, it means more than you know. Sometimes, all it takes is one person listening to make someone feel seen. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. The sun spilled gold over the steel frame of the Throg's Neck Bridge, but I only felt the sharp wind off the Atlantic's salty cold biting against my skin. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as the towers of West Point loomed in the distance. Today was my brother Jasper's day, the Army's golden boy, the pride of the Sterling bloodline. And I was the name left off the guest list. The bridge stretched before me like a chasm, dividing 2 versions of myself. On one side, I was Major General Nova Sterling, a decorated intelligence officer known only to those with high enough clearance to pronounce my name in briefings behind closed doors. On the other side, I was just the forgotten daughter, the invisible sister, the Sterling who didn't fit. I couldn't forget the party our father threw when Jasper got accepted into West Point. A catered event, no less polished crystal suits and proud speeches. Dad stood beside Jasper and said, "Now that's a real Sterling man." That same week, I had won a national award in strategic analysis. When I showed him the certificate, he gave it a cursory glance, said, "That's nice," and handed it back. Later, I found it placed inside a cedar box buried in a dusty attic drawer. That was the first brick in the wall I began to build inside myself. A wall to mute the sound of being overlooked. General Bennett had reached out to me 2 days prior, said he had a surprise for me at Jasper's ceremony. That should have been a red flag. But part of me, naive or just tired, wanted to see what it was. Maybe some fragment of hope I hadn't extinguished yet. I wore a light gray civilian trench coat, concealing the stars on my shoulders. No one here would suspect who I really was. And honestly, it was easier that way. When you've lived most of your life being told your victories weren't the kind that mattered, you learn to hide them. When I reached the West Point gates, I rolled down the window and handed over my military ID to the security officer. He scanned the list, then looked up with a polite frown. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the guest list." I blinked. "Could you check again?" He did. Twice. Then shrugged helplessly. From the sidewalk, I spotted my parents. My mother avoided eye contact. My father stood still, hands behind his back, his posture straight but unmoving. And then came Jasper walking toward me with the confidence of someone who never had to doubt if he belonged. They must have thought you were logistics. He smirked. Desk officers don't usually get invited to field ceremonies. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My hands clenched on the steering wheel. I could have explained, could have called in clearance, forced my way through. But what would that prove to them, to me? So I nodded slowly and shifted into reverse. Just as I began to back out of the checkpoint, a black sedan with diplomatic plates pulled up behind me. The door opened. General Bennett stepped out crisp in his Class A uniform. His voice rang clear across the parking lot. "Welcome, Major General Sterling." Every head turned. The officer at the gate scrambled to salute. My family froze. My brother paled. But I didn't look at any of them. I stepped out of my car and walked beside General Bennett toward the ceremony grounds, silent as the storm I'd become. Most people think war is fought with guns and bodies. Mine is fought with blinking lights, encrypted transmissions, and timelines no one's allowed to mention. Deep underground in a room called the Vault. I direct military operations across continents without ever leaving my chair. The Vault has no windows, just walls covered in screens. Topographical maps, intercepted comms visual feeds from satellites and drones. The air always smells faintly of ozone and metal humming with the tension of decisions made in real time. That week, I was coordinating multiple missions in the Middle East. One particular signal caught my eye, a pattern of electromagnetic interference near a supply route in eastern Afghanistan. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but paired with human intel we'd picked up days before it pointed to a high-probability ambush. I cross-checked units operating in the area. One designation flashed across my screen: Maverick 1, commanded by none other than Lieutenant Jasper Sterling. My pulse spiked, but training kicked in. I rerouted a Black Hawk to perform a low recon sweep, sent in an encrypted warning to ground command, and activated counter-drone jamming in a 30-mile radius. The ambush was neutralized before it began. 12 soldiers, my brother among them, lived because of it. And they would never know. That night, back at my desk, I received a message. From Jasper. "Hope you're not overworking with those thrilling paperwork drills. Don't sprain your wrists typing." I stared at the words for a long time. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't reply. There was no point. Even if I told him what I'd done, he wouldn't believe it mattered. A few days later, I was called into General Bennett's office at the Pentagon. The room was saturated with the smell of leather and fresh coffee, a kind of quiet reverence in the air. He sat behind his desk, flipping through a red folder marked "Classified Eyes Only." He looked up. "You saved a unit last week, Major General. That unit included someone named Sterling." I nodded slowly. "I'm aware." He closed the file and leaned back. "Operation Nightshade? Your operation has been partially declassified. The President's been briefed. You're to receive the Distinguished Service Medal." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I wasn't used to commendations. I had a drawer full of citations, each one locked behind red tape, but because this one might actually be spoken aloud. Then General Bennett added, "There's something poetic about recognizing you at the same ceremony, honoring your brother. You know, the one who thinks you push pencils for a living." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "He still thinks I tour museums for a living." "Well," the general said, sliding the folder toward me, "maybe it's time to correct the narrative." I left the office with the folder pressed to my chest, a swirl of pride and apprehension twisting in my stomach. The recognition wasn't what scared me. It was the knowing deep down that the truth, when finally exposed, doesn't just shine. It burns. And not everyone survives the light. When the black sedan pulled into the front gate of West Point, all eyes turned. The security guards snapped to attention, flustered. The chatter around the entrance stilled as General Bennett stepped out of the car and addressed me without hesitation. "Welcome, Major General Sterling." I didn't return the gasps or stares that followed. I simply nodded, adjusted my coat, and walked behind him through the security gate. The guard stammered out an apology, scrambling to open the barricade. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the ripple in my family's formation. My mother covered her mouth. My father's stance faltered, his rigid spine tipping forward just slightly. And Jasper took one small step back, like the ground beneath him had shifted. I didn't stop. I didn't meet their eyes, not because I was ashamed those days had long passed, but because this moment wasn't about them. I followed the general toward the VIP hall, leaving behind their stunned silence, like a vapor trail. Inside the waiting area, I slipped off my coat and folded it neatly across the back of a chair. For the first time in years, I let my shoulders stand bare in uniform. The two silver stars on my collar caught the soft light above me. They shimmered, not loudly, but distinctly, like a quiet truth refusing to be buried any longer. This wasn't a statement for the crowd outside. It wasn't revenge. It was simply acknowledgement to myself that I no longer needed to dim who I was, just be tolerated. The ceremony hall buzzed with attention as Jasper's name was called. He walked up to the podium like it was built for him, back straight jaw proud. He accepted the Army Commendation Medal with perfect posture and perfect composure, delivering a speech filled with words like honor duty and legacy. But not once did he mention me. Not a word, not a glance. As if I wasn't sitting 20 feet from the stage. As if the woman who had studied tactics with him late into the night at age 17 had never existed. As if the person who had silently saved his life days ago was nothing more than air. The applause was thunderous. I remained still, my hands folded gently in my lap. General Bennett stepped back onto the stage. His appearance wasn't scheduled. I knew because I'd reviewed the itinerary. But he moved with purpose. "There's one more medal to be presented today," he said. The room quieted. All attention returned to the front. "This award is not for heroism in direct combat," he continued, "but for decisive action that saved 12 American lives, including members of Maverick One, by intercepting and dismantling an international arms network and stopping an ambush before it occurred." A murmur spread across the crowd. Some glanced toward the brass in the front row, some toward Jasper. Others just leaned in. "This honor," the general said, voice unwavering, "belongs to Major General Nova Sterling." My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I stood and walked calmly to the stage, the two stars on my shoulders catching the lights of West Point's vaulted ceiling. For the first time, all eyes in that room saw me not as someone's daughter or someone's sister, but as something wholly, entirely my own. I accepted the Distinguished Service Medal in silence. Then I turned bowed slightly to the audience and let my gaze land exactly where I needed it to, on only 4 people who had refused to clap. My father's lips moved as if asking, "Nightshade." My mother stared at the floor, blinking rapidly. Jasper's fists were clenched, his face drained of color. They weren't angry. Not yet. They were lost. Adrift in the revelation that the person they'd spent years dismissing had never needed their approval to become more than they could imagine. The clink of cutlery and murmurs of celebration faded as I followed the carpeted hallway to the side reception room. Jasper was already there, pacing his dress uniform immaculate, his expression far from it. He didn't wait. As soon as the door closed behind us, he turned sharply. "You couldn't let me have this, could you?" he hissed. "You just had to make it about you." I tilted my head slightly. I didn't arrange anything. General Bennett chose the time and place. "Don't play coy," he snapped. "You've been hiding your rank from the family for years. Now suddenly, you're front and center. You manipulated him. You embarrassed us. You embarrassed me." I took a breath, calm and slow. I stopped explaining myself to people who never listened a long time ago. He blinked. For a second, he looked like the little boy I used to build Lego fortresses with. Then the mask came back. My father's voice interrupted from the doorway. You should have let your brother have his moment. I turned. He stood with his arms crossed, but his voice lacked its usual steel. My mother stood behind him, softer, but not apologetic. Did you really need to do it this way? Nova in front of everyone? The words didn't sting like they might have before. They didn't cut. They just felt tired, like echoes from a past I'd already moved beyond. I looked at them, three people who shared my name, but not my path, and said evenly, for once, I didn't hide. That's all. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. A secure call. Urgent. Priority level red. I turned a screen toward them. This is why I didn't come here to make a scene. Because while you argue over pride, people out there are relying on me to keep them alive. Jasper's mouth opened, but I was already walking past him, coat in hand. You think being a general means you get to showboat? He muttered behind me. I paused in the doorway. No, I said without turning. Being a general means I don't have time for showboating. Back in the car headed for DC, the silence pressed in. No music, no news, just the hum of the road and the weight of clarity. I'd gotten what I once thought I needed recognition. But without their understanding, it felt like an echo against a wall I no longer lived behind. I opened my hand and stared at the silver stars resting in my palm. They were heavier than I remembered. Not with shame, not with grief, but with a truth I'd finally allowed myself to carry. I wasn't the girl who had sat quietly in a back row, whose achievements were tucked into cedar boxes and left to gather dust. I was a soldier, a strategist, a general, and no one, no matter how long they tried, could erase that now. 1 week had passed since the ceremony at West Point. Back in my DC apartment, the silence wrapped itself around me like an old, heavy coat. No calls, no messages, no apologies. Just the dull rhythm of my own breathing and the hum of the refrigerator echoing through an otherwise lifeless space. At the vault, the tempo remained relentless. I oversaw developing operations centered on intercepting encrypted data being transferred from a compromised NATO base in Eastern Europe. On paper, I was fully functional. In practice, my mind dragged behind each task. Something in me had shifted, loosened. Not from the medal or the applause, but from what came after, or more accurately, what didn't. In the elevator heading to a top-floor briefing, a colonel I barely knew leaned in with a half smile and a whisper. I heard you orchestrated the ceremony just to grab the spotlight. Impressive timing. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, but because the effort it would have taken to defend myself suddenly felt pointless. That kind of rumor didn't come from nowhere. Over the next 2 days, pieces came together. I heard murmurs in break rooms, caught sidelong glances in secure corridors. A memo unsigned floated internally with wording too precise to be accidental. Sterling withheld rank to stage public surprise and undermine an active duty officer. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Jasper, it seemed, wasn't done. If he couldn't discredit me on merit, he would do it through insinuation. Quiet, steady erosion from within the very institution I had sworn to serve. Then came the letter. It was delivered by the hand of the same household assistant who had once brought me tea after family dinners. Now he stood at the security checkpoint of the vault, holding a sealed envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. I waited until I was alone in my office to open it. The paper inside was thin, soft-scented faintly with lavender, but the words were sharp. Nova. Your father has had a difficult time these past few days. Jasper only tried to protect what our name stands for. You made a spectacle of the family. If you still value us, apologize to your brother. He deserves that much. Mother. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were steady, but something else trembled inside me. I folded the letter in half and laid it beside my service medal, one awarded by a grateful nation, the other an unspoken indictment from the woman who gave me life. The contrast was blinding. Later that week, I was scheduled to appear at a Department of Defense press briefing about Operation Nightshade. It was meant to contextualize the role of intelligence in high-level military strategy and highlight interdepartmental coordination. I had my statement memorized, my tone rehearsed. I had done this before. The room was bright with overhead lights and crowded with press. I stepped up to the podium, introduced myself, and began my report. Near the end of the session, a journalist from one of the defense publications raised his hand. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were sharp. "General Sterling," he said, "is it true that you deliberately withheld your rank at your brother's West Point ceremony to manipulate the optics of the moment and reframe your public image?" I didn't blink, but I felt something go hollow inside me. The question hadn't come from curiosity. It came from a script. I looked at the journalist for a beat longer than necessary. "That event was not about optics," I said carefully. "It was about service. If anyone thinks otherwise, they're free to believe it. My work speaks louder than whispers." General Bennett, seated beside me, leaned forward. "For the record," he said clearly, "Major General Sterling was selected by this office to be honored based on her work during Operation Nightshade." All protocols were followed. This recognition was earned, not requested. The room fell into an uneasy hush. The press conference ended shortly after. Driving back, I stared out the window of the black car, replaying the moment on loop. Not the question itself, but the wave of doubt it would unleash. In rooms like these, silence is often louder than defense. It wasn't just my credibility they questioned. It was the legitimacy of my voice, my authority, my place. I thought back to the applause at West Point. How much of it had been genuine? How many of those hands would still clap now? In the days that followed, I stopped looking in the mirror in the mornings. I pulled my hair into quick buns, avoided eye contact in the glass wall reflections as I passed. I answered fewer emails. I spoke only when operationally necessary. At night, I sat alone at my desk, lights dimmed, surrounded by glowing maps and surveillance feeds. I watched the shifting borders of countries I'd never stepped foot in, calculated troop movement ratios, and sent coded instructions that could change the course of history. And yet, not one of those commands made me feel seen. The wall I had spent a decade building inside me, the stone wall that had once been armor, had started to close in. It no longer protected me. It imprisoned me. The isolation I had chosen for survival was beginning to suffocate. The church in Georgetown was nearly empty on a rainy Sunday morning. A few flickering candles lined the altar, their dim light casting warm shadows on the old stone walls. I sat in the third pew, fingers laced in front of me, not to pray, but to breathe. This place had once brought me solace as a cadet, sanctuary from test drills and family pressure. I hadn't been back in years. Now I returned, not seeking answers, but clarity. That afternoon, I wrote a letter. This time, it was my handwriting on the envelope. I addressed it to the Sterling estate. "If you wish to speak with me, do so, not as judges or victims. Do not speak to me through Jasper. Do not frame me as a footnote in his story. I am not an accessory. I am not invisible. I will meet only those willing to see me as a full person with a full voice." 2 days later, I stood once again in the foyer of the family home. The place felt smaller somehow despite its size. Shrunk by memories I no longer feared. My father sat in his usual chair. My mother perched at the edge of the couch. Jasper stood near the fireplace, arms crossed but not confrontational. I didn't wear a coat. I didn't hide the stars. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't prepare a speech. I simply stood before them and let them show me who they were. Jasper went first. "You always wanted to outshine me," he said. "You just waited until the whole world was watching to do it." I looked at him, not with anger, but exhaustion. I didn't need to outshine you, Jasper. You burned your own light by pretending no one else had one. My father spoke next, voice lower than I remembered. You chose a hidden path. You can't expect to be celebrated the same way. I answered, steady and plain. I didn't choose the hidden path. I chose the necessary one. And every life I helped protect, including Jasper's, was worth more than applause. I recounted the night in the vault, the incoming signal, the satellite distortion, the name Maverick 1 on the manifest, the 90 seconds I had to change everything. I didn't have time to hate you, Jasper, I said. I had time to act. The room fell silent. Then I spoke once more. I won't be written out again. If this family can't see me for who I am, I won't ask to be included. Not anymore. I turned and walked away. I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't crave one. Back at the vault, I resumed my shift. We were tracking a potential breach in East Africa. I issued orders, confirmed intercepts, secured data channels. In the quiet of my office, I looked at my reflection in the tinted glass of the command screen. Then carefully, I clipped the silver stars back onto my collar. I didn't smile for them. I smiled for me. A month passed after that final confrontation, and my world settled into a rhythm so quiet it felt like background noise. I returned to my post at the vault, resumed my shifts, reviewed intelligence flows, issued coded instructions, and watched the digital outlines of conflict play out on cold blue screens. On the outside, everything had returned to normal. Inside, I lived with a new kind of silence. No messages came from home, not from my mother, not from my father, not from Jasper. I didn't expect them. Still, each time my phone buzzed, some part of me braced, ready to see a name I had trained myself to stop hoping for. Then one afternoon, Olivia Harper appeared at my doorway. She didn't knock. She never did. She placed a file on the edge of my desk and said, "You might want to read this. Looks like someone finally decided the truth was worth putting in writing." It was an internal report from the Army Inspector General. The file documented a pattern of exaggerated accounts in after-action reports authored by Jasper. Most notably, the mission near the Afghan border, the one I'd quietly saved from disaster. The report confirmed what I'd suspected, but never voiced that Jasper had omitted intelligence coordination from his narrative entirely. The findings concluded with a note. Failure to acknowledge joint force collaboration may reflect intentional misrepresentation. The words didn't shock me, but they left a heaviness in my chest that no amount of breathing could shake. Later that week, the military press picked it up. Defense Watch published a feature titled "Hero or Hype? A Closer Look at Lieutenant Jasper Sterling's Record Keeping." They didn't use my name, but they didn't have to. Their readers knew. The phrases, "a last-minute intercept," "an unidentified command," all pointed back to one truth I'd lived and carried alone. That evening, I received an email. The subject line was simple: "I owe you this." The sender was Clara. Her message was long, careful, sincere. She wrote, "I believed my husband because it was easier than asking why his story had gaps. But what he did to you and to the institution can't be dismissed as rivalry. It was betrayal. To you and to the uniform we both swore to honor." She asked to meet. I agreed. We sat at a cafe near the Pentagon, surrounded by men in uniform and women in suits, all too busy to notice the two of us. Clara didn't waste time. "I supported him out of loyalty," she said, "but I should have stood by truth. And by you." I nodded. I didn't thank her. It wasn't the time. But I listened. Meanwhile, a friend of my father's, a retired general, reached out. He told me the report had circulated among senior officers and that my father had received a copy personally. He read it several times, the man said. Then he put it down and walked away without a word. That silence spoke louder than any reprimand. Days later, I was alone in my apartment when I heard the knock. I didn't have to look through the peephole. I already knew. Jasper stood there, soaked from the drizzle, outside, hands in the pockets of his service coat. He didn't ask to come in. He didn't smile. "Are you proud of yourself?" he said. I leaned on the door frame. "Should I be?" He let out a breath. "You've always had that look, like you're above everything. You never needed anyone, did you?" I didn't answer. He shifted, glanced past me into the apartment. "I did what I thought Dad wanted. I built the image he respected. I kept quiet about you because you threatened it. I stayed quiet." "I'm not here for forgiveness," he said. I lost?" I studied his face. No arrogance, no pretense. Just fatigue. "Losing to the truth isn't really losing," I said. He nodded once, then left. I watched from the window as he walked down the street, his shoulders slumped, his stride uneven. For the first time, he didn't look like a soldier. He looked like someone finally forced to carry the weight of the man he'd pretended to be. I didn't know if he'd change, but I no longer needed him to. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a shadow behind my brother's shine. I was the light he had tried to block and could no longer escape. 3 months later, an envelope arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, neat, deliberate. Inside was a single card. "If you have time, we'd like you to come to dinner. No expectations, just your company. Dad and Mom." I stood with the card in hand for a long moment, unsure what I felt. I didn't know if this was peace or a prelude. But I went. The Sterling estate hadn't changed. The same columns, the same garden, the same high ceilings. But the people inside had. Or maybe I had. They didn't greet me with stiff hugs or forced smiles. They simply welcomed me in. My father didn't lecture. My mother didn't deflect. Over dinner, my father finally spoke. I read everything he said. I was wrong. I didn't think I could be. He stood and walked to a cabinet I'd never seen open before. Inside were 3 display cases. One held his old bronze star. One held a rusted insignia from my grandfather. And in the center, behind polished glass, sat my distinguished service medal. My mother placed a hand on mine. "I didn't understand your world," she said, "but I see the woman it made you into. That's enough." I didn't cry, but something inside me softened. I didn't forgive, but I let go. A week later, another letter arrived. This one was from Jasper. He wrote about enrolling in a military ethics course, about choosing not to ask Dad for favors this time, about wanting to do something honest, not for recognition, but because he no longer wanted to be a man built from borrowed expectations. He ended with, "I used to think you were the backup plan, but now I see you were the standard I was too scared to meet." One quiet evening, I returned to the house. I stepped into the backyard and saw Jasper on the old wooden swing we used to share as children. He was staring out into the trees. He looked up. "I don't know who I'll become," he said, "but if you're still around, maybe you could help me figure it out." I didn't answer. I sat down beside him. The creak of the chain was the only sound between us. That was enough. Back at the vault, I resumed my shift. Same walls, same glow of screens, same pulse of global pressure. But this time, I left the office door open. I let people see me. I let myself be seen. Before ending my shift, I paused, opened my desk drawer, and took out my insignia. I held it to the light, not as armor, not as proof, but as foundation. For the first time, my title didn't define me. My family didn't define me. My silence didn't define me. I did. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on front lines, but in the quiet spaces where we seek to be seen, heard, and valued. Recognition means nothing if it costs your peace, and yet silence is never the answer either. We all deserve to stand in our truth, even if we have to stand alone first. If this story moved you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter. Thank you for listening.